It's time for Cutting Edge Consciousness with Freeman Michaels and Barnett Bain. Thought-provoking discussions and bold ideas from the edge of possibility.
I wanted to talk a little bit today, Barnett.
That'll be different. We never do. We never do.
We
that.
never talk. Let's talk.
Let's sign a little bit.
Let's see how that works. I want to talk about something we've talked about quite a bit, but I want to talk about it in a different way. So we've talked a lot about dynamic complexity.
Yeah.
And by that, what we've said is, basically we're talking about an expanded consciousness where things can be true and not true at the same time, where we can hold paradox, where there's a dimensionality to our perspective, where we see all kinds of myriad ways of interpreting.
We hold them all simultaneously.
But I want to talk about this a slightly different way in terms of a positive, I'm going to call it ambiguity, where we are both peeling away layers of interpretation and at the same time adding in layers of possibility and interpretation, if you want, positive meanings, ways of being with what is showing up in our experience. And I want to be even more specific because we've been talking recently about the third story again. The third story, for those of you who have tuned in, is a story that we get to developmentally where we hold multiple stories at the same time, which when there's enough of them, there's no story at all. In other words, when we've got all these various ways we can interpret something and have interpreted them.
We might help people a little bit by putting it into context.
Go ahead.
And we'll come back. So the first story is the little story of what happened to me. I was born into these circumstances, or my boss doesn't treat me well, or my dog died, or like every country western song and all news.
Heavily scripted.
This is what happened to me, and it's the oh poor me story.
Yeah.
And then the second story is how I overcame the oh poor me story.
We call it the triumph story.
I worked hard. I prevailed. This is sort of the American dream thing about if you really just work, you can overcome all of your obstacles. And you make it to the corner office. You become the American dream, and it's beautiful, and it's good, and it's true, and it's a powerful story of triumph and of achievement, and all of that is true. There's another story that we call the third story, and that story is comes after we've recognized and owned the first story, after we've recognized and owned the second story. Then
once we've done it enough and the payoff diminishes and diminishes.
Once we have done it sufficiently so that we are not part of the second story is the infatuation with power and with status and with once we and not having any power and not having any status is likewise an infatuation with it.
Right.
Well, I'm not going to have any of it, so you're still at the mercy of it.
Well, that's actually something you just opened right there. There's a little Pandora's box that's worth exploring.
Well, do we want to digress?
I think it's worth digressing, only because it's really important. We've called this premature transcendence syndrome. The reaction to what we've called the reservation, which are
like I don't want any money, the 99% and the 1%, and so those people with if it's all the reaction to having money is loaded, and the reaction to not having money is loaded.
Same deal, different day.
It's still an adaptive response to a certain set of conditioned imagination, imaginal experience.
So let's say in my conditioning, there's 5 ways that I as a man get to be successful in this culture. And
by becoming a status object, and then women get to become
money,
sex objects,
girl,
and we get success
fame,
objects.
Yeah, money, get the girl, fame, status, whatever. There's these very limited ways that I get to be successful as a man within this culture, and I'm tied to it. So I'm not tied to it. That's the goal is to untie that a little. But this is very second story. This is bound in second story. And even the reaction to that, where we say, "Oh, I don't care about that," or "I don't care about that," the reaction means that paradigm is still running the show. When we get to the third story, it is a blowing out of the box, if you will. It's a way in which it doesn't diminish.
It doesn't diminish the first story?
No,
it doesn't diminish the second story. It supersedes and includes both.
It includes. That's the idea.
When I am now close to 60 years old. That I'm close to 60 years old does not diminish when I was 40 or when I was 15 or when I was 8. It supersedes and includes all of those things.
Right.
I can get in touch in a moment with the part of me that is an adolescent boy. I can get it doesn't mean that I'm not making it bad. I'm not making it wrong. It's a different, more. It's a more expansive understanding of myself in that way.
Okay, so now the realm of the third story.
Mm-hmm.
When we hold all these stories, as I first said, all these layers of interpretation that we've peeled away or layered in or both, all of them are existing. At some point, there's no story. If we can hold enough stories, enough possible interpretations, enough that there becomes no story, then we are in a different. Again, we've used the expression. We open up into a sensory experience.
I'd frame it just
Go ahead.
a little bit different, because I know what you mean, because we've had this conversation. But I think somebody listening may not get a distinction that I know you're intending. You're not suggesting that we say no to stories.
It's the opposite.
You're
It includes them.
suggesting, and you're not suggesting that we just make a whole bunch more stories,
Right.
with the objective being that I'm going to manipulate my way into something else. But what happens naturally is that we live through the first story, we experience the second story. In the third story, we begin to see that my value, my mattering as a human being is not a function of my achievements, nor is it a function of my status, nor is it a function, not good or bad, it just is a conscious realization that it's something else. And the exploration of that something else takes form in many, many stories. And then we begin to ask the question, is there a self, is there an aspect of me, a self that is not attached to stories? That if I pull out all of my stories, do I cease to exist? Does the imagination itself stop at the frontier of reason? No, it does not. It goes on. Control stops at the frontier of reason. And everything within logic and reason, story-wise, my sense of self, my stories about myself, my history, everything I think of myself, that is a product of my control.
Yeah.
But beyond it, it is, I am now connecting with aspects of myself, of my own imagination, that imagine themselves, that are imagining with me. And that is, it's not that there are no stories, but that's now a frequency that is beyond any experience that I have of stories. So we are adding this piece on to the work that we've been doing together, exploring the third story. This is another edge that we are in real time looking into and experiencing.
Yeah, and the experiencing of it, one little piece I wanted to say, because I wrote it down and I feel like it's worth saying, is that when we talked about chaos is the coming apart of the stories. That's what throws our feels like chaos, because all these things we've held on to, which we've called the reservation, this construct that we say this is the way the world works, is coming apart. And it's a critical part of transformation. We covered that in the Robert Williams interview. And so what we arrive at is this edge of possibility. And the possibility, the way the doors of possibility open, it's not a logic and reason process. It's capacities that are not logic and reason. It has to do with, again, this sensory relationship where we allow in. It's an opening. It's we've called it wondering and wandering. It's where we begin to, it's a body. It's a sensed experience of the world that is rich with possibility. It is infinite in its possibility. And
well, we have
go ahead.
We have a mental understanding of that.
Yeah.
but we don't have an experiential one. So we keep collapsing back in.
Right.
It's like one of those fountains at the bar that say Coors on the side, and it's just this endless flow back and forth in on itself. We have physical senses that calibrate physical reality.
Yeah.
But we have unfamiliar senses that are calibrations of non-physical reality. And artists have experience of this, some more consciously than others. This is what the muses refer to.
Right.
We begin to hear it discussed more and more. We hear it presented as things like in the business world, gut instincts and intuitions, and these are unfamiliar calibrations of
subtle energies,
subtle energies of self beyond logic and reason, self unconstrained by stories. First story, second story, and most of the third story is a product of the domain of logic, of reason, of memory, of time and space.
Yep.
Beyond that, what we call the structured imagining. Beyond that is a dimension of imagination that imagines with us.
Yeah.
And so there is this chaos that you refer to, that on the one hand can be, if it's a resistance to it, it becomes a struggle, and it shows up as an experience unpleasant.
Yeah. Problems
of the disintegration of structure. It's not simple. This is not simply a matter to be dealt with by assessing one's beliefs or one's thoughts or one's feelings, but it is a matter to be understood by becoming aware of all of those energies.
Yep.
And then beyond them, there is something much more powerful that seeps through the filter, the matrix of all of those filters, and shows up at the squishy end of the funnel as what we allow into our reality. So
and then at that point, all of these the 5 ways I could be successful, all these things that
they all shift.
We blow them up, and they don't.
They look the same. When people looking in, they say, "Well, she's got it all going."
Right.
They look in because they look through the
filter.
lenses of their own values.
Yeah.
And the third story is an exploration of a different set of values that are not so entrenched in logic and reason.
Right.
And we begin to become, as consciousness expands, more attuned to resonances that are beyond logic and reason, and to a logical mind make no sense, and so they're dismissed.
Right.
What use is it, or what value is a creative pursuit that has no apparent application?
Right.
It's a waste of time.
Right.
But for me, the answer to that is, I'm creating it. I don't know. I'm creating it in real time. This is an act of primordial creation.
Yeah.
I'm not just rearranging the furniture on the reservation. I'm now moving up a path that's virgin, at least to me.
Right.
And I am creating something on the fly, the outcome of which I have no sense of what that can be, but I have an expectation energetically that it will be wonderful and empowering.
Yep.
I have a desire that it will give pleasure and love and awareness to myself and to others. So I have certain training wheels on the back of this blind exploration that keep it from going off the edges altogether. This is not control. It's simply an expression of, this is now my character.
Yeah.
And I am open to be discovered by what happens. And I begin to develop new capacities that come online. This sense of an awareness of the warmth, not the temperature warmth.
Right.
A sense of the awareness of the aliveness, the charisma in others. Not their showmanship, their jump up and down, look at me, but the quality of their vitality. Are they dead? Are they shut down in certain areas? I begin to have the filters to perceive that in other people.
Right.
The ability to perceive
And not just
voice
in other people, but
in things,
in nature.
in everything. It's all me.
Because there's an intelligence. There's this energetic intelligence
It's all
that we can
us.
tap into. We've called it the field, that we can relate to, that opens up tremendous possibility. It's the energetics and the qualities that begin to
well, we begin to name the energetics.
right.
We begin to name in the way that explorers sailed across oceans with blank pieces of paper and created cartographies. They begin to name, put a name to. We are putting a name to bandwidth.
Right.
If you collapse the idea of bandwidth into the visible spectrum, the bottom is infrared, at the top is ultraviolet. In between, we have a range of colors, and that is the only reflected light that we have the modulators to perceive, and our brain actually puts a name to it. But my dog hears more than I do, and certain animals, cats, have a bigger visible range than I do.
Right. And photons, which is
It's all basic units of light anyway. They are there whether I see them,
That's
hear
right.
them, experience them or not. But I am adding capacity
Yep.
as part of this evolutionary movement. I'm adding capacity to detect movement itself, even in the stillness of things. I am aware of my own response to the evolutionary call to bring more of myself online, to find more and more expressions to give and receive love, to be more awake and more lit, that in the quietest moment I am aware of the movement of things in myself and more in others.
Yeah.
And I'm aware of the substance of things, not in rocks are hard, water is wet, but is this individual of substance? I am aware of warmth we talked about, and voice and charisma and aliveness. So these qualities are not just metrics of they can be collapsed into the familiar metrics of sight, sound, taste. I make my world not smaller, but I keep it safely what I'm comfortable in.
Right.
But as I begin to allow myself to process that information beyond the bandwidth that I'm familiar with, my world becomes exponentially larger. I am wiring new neurochemistry.
Right.
It becomes, as I do so, it becomes easier and easier for me to begin to use that circuitry. It becomes a physiologically the physiology begins to support the non-physical intention. So when we talk about the third story, folks, we're talking about all of this. We're talking about moving ever more courageously off the reservation into really virgin territory.
And the measuring devices, because you brought up metrics, that we've used so far are insufficient for where we're going. So it is a stepping into the unknown. It is a welcoming of mystery, and it is experiential, and it's forward. It's what we've got in the looking back only takes us so far. This is a forward experience into something that arrives, that occurs, that we experience, and we begin to recognize that we're moving into a co-creation of an experience that is yet unfolding. With that, we get to say goodbye.